Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I come from a traditional Asian family, and like many others in my culture, there's this unspoken rule that once you get married, having children becomes your top priority. I watched my cousins and friends go through the same thing. The moment they got married, everyone started asking about babies. When I got married 10 years ago, I was excited to start this new chapter of my life with my husband. We both had great careers, had just bought our dream house, and were genuinely happy. But apparently that wasn't enough for everyone around us. It started with subtle hints from my mother, who would remind me that she got pregnant with me just 3 months after her marriage. Then came my aunts at every family gathering, asking if I had been taking my vitamins and warning me that I was too thin to have a healthy baby. My mother-in-law wasn't any better, constantly reminding me that her son needed the child to carry on the family name. Even my neighbors, who had no business in my personal life, would stop me during my morning jogs to warn me that I shouldn't exercise too much if I was trying to conceive. But the workplace was the worst. I worked in a corporate office with about 50 people, and somehow my reproductive plans became everyone's favorite topic of discussion. Every time I declined a drink at a company event, people would exchange knowing looks, only to be disappointed when I explained it was just because I was driving. The final straw came during what should have been a regular Monday morning meeting. I had prepared a comprehensive presentation about our quarterly results, which I was genuinely proud of. There were 10 colleagues in the conference room, all settled in with their coffee and notepads. That's when this co-worker, who was notorious for her lack of boundaries, decided to start her usual routine. She looked me up and down before commenting loudly about how thin I still was, asking why I wasn't getting pregnant soon. The room fell silent. Everyone was looking at me, some with embarrassment, others with curiosity. I had been patient for months, trying to be professional, trying to laugh it off. But something in me snapped that day. Without missing a beat, I replied that I was thin because my husband's was so sweet and I like to keep it in my mouth. Her jaw dropped and her face turned red. Someone in the back choked on their coffee. Another person suddenly became very interested in their shoes. She tried to stammer out a response but couldn't form any words. I took advantage of her speechlessness to redirect everyone's attention to the meeting's agenda, asking if everyone had received it and was ready to discuss the quarterly results. I proceeded with my presentation as if nothing had happened. Nobody dared to make eye contact with her, and she sat there completely silent for the entire meeting. A first, as she usually couldn't go 5 minutes without making some inappropriate comment. After that day, not only did she never ask me about pregnancy again, but she also started avoiding me in the hallways. Word must have spread because suddenly, all the pregnancy-related questions and comments at work stopped. Even in meetings where she was present, she would quickly find excuses to leave if I walked in. My response might have been crude, but it worked like a charm. Sometimes, when people don't understand polite hints, you need to speak their language. And honestly, it felt good to finally stand up for myself. The meeting room incident became a sort of legend in the office, though nobody ever dared to mention it directly to me. Now, whenever I tell this story to my co-workers over lunch, they can't believe I actually said that. But hey, everyone has their breaking point, and that day, I had reached mine. After 15 years of building my software company from scratch, eating ramen noodles, and working 100-hour weeks, I finally made it. My company got acquired by one of the tech giants, and suddenly I had more money than I knew what to do with. I decided to treat myself to my dream house, a gorgeous colonial-style mansion in one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in town. The previous owners had maintained it beautifully, and the moment I saw those marble columns and the sprawling garden, I knew it was the one. The closing process was smooth, and I got the keys last week. Today was moving day. I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood while the moving company was unloading my stuff. I wanted to get a feel for the area, maybe wave hello to some neighbors. I was wearing comfortable clothes, just some sweatpants and a hoodie since I'd been helping with the move all morning. As I was walking down the street, admiring the pristine lawns and fancy cars, I heard someone shouting behind me. The man, who identified himself as the Homeowners Association president, demanded to know what I was doing in the neighborhood. When I turned around, I saw a red-faced man in an expensive suit holding what appeared to be a handgun pointed right at me. My heart started racing, but years of dealing with high-pressure situations in business had taught me to stay calm. I told him I was just taking a walk. He accused me of lying, claiming that, as the Homeowners Association president, he knew everyone who lived there, and that I didn't belong in the neighborhood. When I tried to explain that I had just moved in today to the colonial house, he cut me off. He angrily stated that the house was sold to a successful business owner, making it clear with his tone that he didn't believe someone like me could be that person. I could feel my blood boiling, but I kept my voice steady. I noticed the security cameras on the street poles and decided to play it smart. I pretended to apologize and said I would leave right away. I raised my hand slowly and took a step toward him, appearing to comply. The moment he lowered the gun slightly, I made my move. 15 years of martial arts training kicked in. I knocked the weapon from his hand with a quick strike and swept his legs out from under him. He hit the ground hard, and I quickly pinned him down. While holding him down, I properly introduced myself, telling him I was the new owner of 1577 Maple Drive, the colonial mansion he mentioned. I told him that I was the founder and former CEO of Tech Solutions, which was just acquired for $500 million, and pointed out that he had just committed a serious crime. I pulled out my phone and called 911 while keeping him pinned. I explained to the dispatcher that I needed police at the corner of Maple and Oak in the Hillcrest Estates because the Homeowners Association president had pulled a gun on me for walking while black in my own neighborhood. I assured them I wasn't in danger anymore as I had disarmed him and mentioned that the gun was about 5 feet away from us. The police arrived within minutes. 2 patrol cars and an unmarked vehicle pulled up. The officers looked shocked when they saw the scene. One officer asked if I was all right, and I directed their attention to the street cameras, telling them that the surveillance center could pull the footage which caught everything. I released the HOA president, and the officers immediately cuffed him. When they were reading him his rights, another officer was reviewing the street camera footage on his tablet. When they asked if I wanted to press charges, I told them I wanted to pursue all possible charges. The story made the local news that evening. Turns out our HOA president had quite a history of racial complaints against him, but his victims had always been visitors or contractors who couldn't fight back. The police found 3 unregistered firearms in his house, adding weapons charges to the assault and hate crime charges. The next week, there was an emergency homeowners association meeting. I attended dressed in my best suit. The HOA president's wife was there, pleading with people not to support his removal. She insisted that he had been president for 10 years and claimed this was just a misunderstanding. I responded by pointing out that her husband had pointed a loaded weapon at me for walking down my own street, and that this wasn't a misunderstanding but a felony. The vote to remove him was unanimous. He is now facing 10 years in prison, and his law firm suspended him pending the criminal investigation. Most of his clients dropped him. I'm enjoying my new house. Most of my neighbors have been exceptionally welcoming, probably overcompensating for their former president's behavior. The new HOA president, a lovely retired judge, personally welcomed me to the neighborhood with a bottle of champagne and an apology on behalf of the community. Sometimes I take evening walks past the former HOA president's house, which is now up for sale. His wife can't afford the mortgage payments on her own, and their assets are frozen pending the civil suit I filed. I always make sure to wave at the security cameras when I pass by. I've been practicing dentistry for over 20 years now, and I've seen my fair share of entitled colleagues. But nothing quite compares to the pettiness I encountered when I first opened my practice back in 2015. You see, I had just finished my advanced training in cosmetic dentistry and decided to set up my own practice. After years of working for others, I wanted to create something that truly reflected my values, providing quality care at reasonable prices. I chose to name my practice Better Dental because it represented my commitment to always striving for better patient care and better treatment outcomes. Everything was going smoothly for the first few months. The practice was growing, patients were happy, and I was finally living my dream. Then came the letter that would spark a ridiculous chain of events. One morning, my receptionist handed me an official-looking envelope from the State Board of Dental Examiners. Inside was a complaint filed by another dentist in town. When I read it, I asked my receptionist if this was some kind of joke. She asked what was wrong, and I explained that another dentist was complaining about our practice name, saying we couldn't call ourselves Better Dental because it implied we were superior to other practices without proper justification. When she asked if they could actually do that, I showed her the letter citing Regulation 21 NCAC 16P.01014 about misleading practice names. I was furious. This was clearly just another dentist trying to eliminate competition. I had invested everything into building this practice, including the branding. Changing the name would cost thousands in new signage, marketing materials, and potential loss of patients who might not find us under a new name. The next day, I received a call from the complaining dentist himself. He smugly mentioned seeing that I had received the board's notice and asked if I would be changing the practice name soon. When I told him this was ridiculous and accused him of just trying to hurt my business, he condescendingly cited the regulations and suggested I choose a more appropriate name next time. The smugness in his voice made my blood boil. But instead of getting angry, I got creative. I spent the next few days researching the exact wording of the regulation. That's when I noticed something interesting. The rule specifically mentioned implications of superiority unless there was a legitimate reason for the name. I called my lawyer immediately to ask about the possibility of legally changing my last name to Better. The lawyer thought it was quite clever and explained that if Better became my legal name, then I would simply be naming the practice after myself, which was completely within regulations. The process took a few months, but I officially became Dr. David Allard Draper Better, and the board has dismissed his complaint. Then he actually filed an appeal, protesting that this was outrageous and that I had clearly only changed my name to keep using the practice name. The board member simply stated that while that might be true, Better was now legally my name, and dentists have the right to name their practices after themselves. The complaint was dismissed. The story became somewhat of a legend in local dental circles. Some colleagues thought it was brilliant, others called it petty, but everyone agreed it was one of the most creative ways they'd seen someone handle a complaint. I ran the practice successfully for several more years until I decided to retire early and travel the world. I sold the practice last month, and the new owners had to change the name since none of them had Better as their last name. That's how my son ended up calling me today, confused about the name change. When my son called to ask about the practice being bought out, I explained that technically yes, and since I wasn't there anymore, they couldn't use the Better Dental name. He was confused about why this mattered if it was just a practice name, which led me to tell him the whole story. He couldn't stop laughing and asked if I had actually changed my legal name just to spite another dentist. I explained that sometimes you have to get creative when dealing with entitled people who try to hurt your business, and added that the name had grown on me, mentioning how his mother still finds it hilarious when she introduces herself as Mrs. Better. The other dentist practice, by the way, closed down 2 years ago. Turns out he spent so much time trying to undermine other dentists that he forgot to focus on his own patient care. Meanwhile, Better Dental became one of the most successful practices in the area, known for its quality care and patient satisfaction. I may have retired now, but the story of how I outmaneuvered an entitled colleague by literally becoming better will always be one of my favorite memories from my dental career. After finishing medical school, my husband and I decided it was time to put down roots during my graduate training. We've been renting for years, and with the housing market in Michigan being relatively affordable, we figured it made sense to invest in a property rather than continue paying rent. We found this charming two-story house in a quiet neighborhood that felt perfect for us. The previous owners had maintained it well, and we got it for a reasonable price. We'd barely finished unpacking when the first incident happened. I was organizing our kitchen when I heard a knock at the door. Outside stood a middle-aged woman with an expectant smile on her face. She introduced herself and explained that she had grown up in this house. She asked if she could look around, citing nostalgia for her childhood home. Initially, I didn't think much of it. My own mother had made a similar request when passing by her childhood home years ago. It seemed innocent enough, so I welcomed her inside. As we walked through the house, she started sharing stories about each room, which was fine at first. But then her tone changed. She began telling me that the house should have been hers, claiming that someone had cheated her out of the opportunity to buy it when it was on the market. She insisted that the seller had never even considered her offer. I felt uncomfortable but tried to remain polite. When I explained that we had worked with our realtor and gone through the proper channels for our purchase, she surprised me by asking if we would consider selling the house to her, promising she could make a good offer. I told her we had just moved in and weren't looking to sell. She pressed further, asking when we might consider moving. I tried to deflect by saying we weren't sure. Maybe in 4 to 5 years after my training was complete. I offered to take her information and pass it to our realtor if we decided to sell then. She left her contact details, but something felt off about the whole interaction. A few weeks later, while my husband and I were doing yard work, she showed up again. This time she asked if we had given any more thought to when we might sell. I repeated my previous answer about not planning to move for at least 4 to 5 years. She responded by trying to guilt us, saying how much the house meant to her and suggesting we should reconsider. After she left, we started feeling really uneasy. Then things got really weird. Our next-door neighbor called us one afternoon with disturbing news. They had spotted the woman who kept visiting us lying in our front yard when we weren't home. The neighbor said she only left when she realized she was being watched. That's when we realized this wasn't just a nostalgic former resident, this was becoming harassment. We installed security cameras and contacted the police to file a report. They took our concerns seriously, especially after hearing about her trespassing. The police increased patrols in our area and advised us to call immediately if she showed up again. We also spoke with our neighbors, asking them to keep an eye out and contact us if they saw her around the property. 2 weeks later, she came back. This time, I was ready. As soon as she started talking about the house again, I cut her off. I told her that her behavior had become harassment, and told her that she had been seen trespassing on our property when we weren't home. I gave her an official warning to stay away from our house and stop contacting us, mentioning our security cameras and the police report we had filed. I made it clear that if she came here again, we would press charges for harassment and trespassing. She tried to protest, bringing up again that it was her childhood home. I stood my ground and told her that this was our home, which we had bought legally, and that her attachment to it didn't give her any rights to the property. I threatened to call the police if she didn't leave immediately. She finally seemed to get the message. The police followed up with her officially, making it clear that she would face legal consequences if she continued her behavior. We haven't seen her since, but we've kept the security cameras running just in case. Our neighbors have become close friends through all this, and they still keep an eye out for any suspicious activity. Our house has become even more special to us now. We've made it our own, creating new memories and building a life here. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.